Welcome to all the people coming in. I see people slowly trickling in. And please be sure to mute if you're coming in. Hey everyone, how's it going? Feel welcome to drop a hi in the chat for Ploy, who's already here. And we'll get started in about a minute, just in case anybody else is coming in. And while we're waiting, for anybody who was taking part in the workshop, what are your thoughts? What were your big aha moments over the last couple of months when you were working on fielding your study, trying to put the case study together? Anything you learned, any frustrations? I'm very curious to hear about this. Let's see. Okay, yeah, let me know. For those of you who submitted a case study, would love to know how the process went. If it was easier than you expected, if you ran into any trouble. All right. Perhaps we can go ahead and get started by introducing Ploy. And we have a few people popping into the chat to say hi to you, Ploy. So just know that you are very welcome here. We're excited to have you. So we have with us today our special guest, Ploy Hemrathiran. And Ploy is my personal recruiter, actually. I've been working with her for almost 2 years. So it was really a pleasure to work more closely together for this session. Ploy has been recruiting digital and creative talent at TEKsystems for almost 3 years. And this includes everything from executing the full cycle recruitment process, from like finding the talent to like getting them all the way to the offer stage, which I have to say is definitely an intimidating process for those of us who are going through it like the first couple of times, but you're always there to answer questions and just kind of like make it comfortable and easy, which I really appreciate. And you've also done a lot of mentoring of junior recruiters and new recruiters as well. So I know that that is going to help us today when you tell us more about what it is that you do, what it is that you look for when you're looking at job materials, and then you actually walk us through other people's case studies. Ploy has been recognized multiple times for her talent retention and excellence. So everybody, please join me in welcoming to this workshop series.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly. So 1 second here. I didn't have TikTok back then, and I was asking Helen a bunch of questions, and the researcher that she is, she answered every single thing. And then a year later, I finally got a TikTok. So it's been really great partnering with Helen, and I'm really, really glad that she was able to mentor other researchers as well. I know that especially with the pandemic and everything, people are looking to transition to UX research more so than ever, whether that's from academia, whether that's from market research to UX research, consumer insight. Those are all the candidates that I have worked with and helped transfer, or even vice versa, from UX research to product. And what I can say is it does take time, but just continue networking, doing exactly what you're doing now is going to help you along the way. So I have my little tagline, Ploy, like employ, deploy, just because when I'm on the phone, and maybe this also happened to Helen too, she never told me though. When I introduce myself, I have my tagline, hi, my name is Ploy. I am a digital and creative recruiter here at TEKsystems. And they go, Chloe? So this happens to me all the time, but the key is, and I want you guys to take this too, is find something that helps a recruiter remember you, whether that is a tagline on your LinkedIn, whether that is, your banner or profile picture, but obviously keep your picture very professional. So I decided to put this on here because I didn't want to put a picture of myself and I thought this looks better. So Ploy, like employ, deploy, probably the only recruiter that you'll ever meet named Ploy. If I'm wrong, feel free to add me on LinkedIn and tell me so, and we'll go from there. So I know that we went through how Helen and I met. It was actually through a referral, and I worked with her, and my goal as a recruiter is to understand your goals and your interests, because I can probably place you at different companies, but when it comes down to it, even though you are making that transition, it's still good to have a very solid understanding of what you want to do. What I have been hearing as a recruiter, for example, is I'm open to anything and everything. I can go into design. That is okay. That's a good mindset to have. But if you are looking for to really go into UX research, I would be very intentional with that. Sorry, my video is messing up here. But I'd be very intentional about your journey and what that looks like, right? So whether that is going to UX research coordinator, UX research assistant, be very clear with your recruiter, like, hey, this is what I'm interested in. And if you do have some design background from either your master or doing internships, it's totally okay to say, hey, but I also have this background as well. And the reason I say that is it just helps me as a recruiter to define more of what you want. Okay, let me see here. And then on to the next slide. So just like a recruiter, you know, just like you are getting, we're getting to know you. Also get to know a recruiter, where they're at, right? Are they staffing agency? Are they from internal recruiters? Is it contract? Is it full-time? Do they have a specialization? Or are they just a recruiter that focus on different skill sets? Do they have a LinkedIn, right? One thing the reason that I bring up LinkedIn is and this is from talking to a lot of my candidates and consultants, is especially during these mass layoffs, there's also been some scams, right? With people reaching out, and they'll actually have like a job posting somewhere that's not on LinkedIn. I'm not saying everything on LinkedIn is credible, but definitely do your research of who you're talking to. And my goal here at TEKsystems is really around partnership. So what that means is I might not have something for my consultant for 2 months, for 3 months. For Helen, for example, when I first connected with Helen, I had something in mind, but her interest was completely different. She said, I don't want to do that. That doesn't sound fun. And that is totally okay. Like, I want you to be transparent with your recruiter, right? And it boils down to what's most important to you. So for Helen, it might be, you know, the most important thing for me is to work on a B2C product that can really, like, you know, make an impact, and you can see the impact right there, right? And then your most important thing might be, I just want to get my foot in the door, whether that is working with B2B product, internal, whatever that is. But if you have your top 3 most important thing, it's going to really help you navigate a lot better, right? And it doesn't mean that your recruiter is going to satisfy all 3, but they have an idea. So when I reached out to Helen, I said, okay, that's totally okay. And I don't think we talked for a couple of months. And we had a role that came through that was, I guess, more fun. And I think it's more fun too, that we talked about. And she goes, yeah, absolutely. And it turned out to be a really good fit, right? So get to know your recruiter, stay in contact with them. It's all about partnership. And I'll tell you right now, if you guys want to guess in the chat, how many people I talk to a week on the phone and email, like per week, you guys can guess in the chat, but I'll tell you right now, that, ooh, 500. That's a good one. Definitely not 500. I would say around maybe 100 per week. And because I'm in staffing, everything moves so quick. And as much as I would love to remember everyone's name and also, being very intentional. So sometimes it takes me a little bit longer to respond, right? Unless there is something that, came up to my mind. Like Helen, for example, I think we just had a really great conversation. A 30-minute turned to an hour call. And I was like, that's totally okay. But I had such a great conversation with Helen that when this role came out, I was like, I told my account manager, it's like, hey, I have someone for you that I think would be a really great fit. So I read hundreds, like I talk on the phone, read hundreds of emails, and then I also have other things that I'm doing in leadership as well, right, within my company. So your recruiters are, I promise, behind the wheel, they are working. It's totally okay to reach out to them if you don't hear back. Be like, hey, it's been a few weeks. Do you have any update? Sending them an email, LinkedIn, or text messages. I highly recommend asking that in the phone call when you guys first meet. Is like, hey, what is your preferred method of communication, right? Some recruiters will say email. Some people will say, you can text me, right? Some people will say, you can give me a call, or some will say, I will reach out to you. So be sure to ask those questions. And then even at the end, right? Even at the end, I typically always say, hey, if I don't find you anything, feel free to look at my network. See who I'm connected to. So that way, if let's say I know someone that I recently spoke with or have helped convert full-time at FedEx, for example, like, hey, can you connect me with this person? And if I know that person, I'm more than happy to. It's all about networking, and it's all about also who you know as well. So the first thing I put is staffing agency versus talent acquisition. The reason I do that is because the processes are very different. So how many of you have, just by the shows of hand, I think you can do this on Zoom, but how many of you have been contacted by a staffing agency for a contract role before? Okay, Tamara. Cool. So almost a Helen. Right. So really it's good to understand, number one, right, where do they work? So that way what you can do is search up their company. And a lot of times their company have job postings on their website, right? Of like, hey, there are these roles that you can actually directly apply to. But with the staffing agency, everything moves so quick, especially now how competitive it is. It used to be vice versa about 2 years ago, where it was really the candidates market. But now, because of the mass layoffs, because of the economy, it is highly competitive, meaning that if a recruiter reaches out to you, and they are from a staffing agency, more than likely or not, they will get their candidates within a day or two. And with these contracting, you are more than happy to ask these questions of like, hey, what are my benefits, right? Like, it's really good to educate yourself on what's my benefit like? Do I get PTO? What are some of the things like national holidays? And the reason I want to give you guys this right now is because when I talk to a lot of consultants or a lot of candidates that have worked with staffing agency before, they never went through those things until an offer stage or after their onboarding. So it's good to know, like, hey, is this like realistic for me? So let's say if my salary is 120, and I believe that's about $57 to $60 an hour converted, it's not going to be the same, right? Because you have to think about your national holiday, all those things. So make sure you have that, do your research, right? speak with your peer, talk to Helen, just like, hey, how do I figure out compensation wise? And that also goes back to, hey, what are my top 3, right? Compensation might be number 4 because you just want to get your foot in the door. And then with talent acquisition, full-time typically takes a lot longer. And I also have had experience with this as well, because I actually was able to get one of my candidate a job at FedEx for full-time. And instead of it being like a 2-step process, it turned into a full month, a full month process, because it has to go through HR, and then it has to go through approval, and then it goes through TEKsystems. So that one you have a little bit of a leeway, but definitely have a mix of, hey, like I have full-time here in contracting, understanding that timeline of, is it realistic for me to go through this contract if I'm really interested in full-time? So that is completely up to you. And then when it comes to specialization, the reason that I really emphasize on this is our company actually at TEKsystems are really honing down on specialization. So we have people who focus more in developers, engineers. We have people who are focused in digital and creative. Digital and creative is a section of UX design, UX research, marketing, creative project manager, so many, right? So we're even getting more specialized. And the reason that you want to, and it might not be the most important thing, more so nice to have, is recruiter that knows what you do, because they're able to ask the right questions, right? And they're able to understand your interests and goals a little bit more. So for example, if Helen comes to me and said, I don't really, I like do more of the high level research, exploratory, versus just doing tactical research. Some people would be like, oh, okay, that's totally okay. For me, right, I'm like, okay, tell me what that means. Does that mean you're only open to X, Y, and Z, right? And then I sometimes will try to clarify, like, Helen, do you mean, for example, one of our clients at Ford, that's a lot of what they do is very strategic driven, very high level research of what their car is going to look like 10 years from now. Does that mean that you're not open to maybe something that is a little bit more tactical, right? So having that specialized recruiter helps you understand a little bit more of like, what is it that I want? And it's a nice app, but it's not something that you need. And then LinkedIn, right? Like look at my LinkedIn. I'm not sure, I think Helen put my LinkedIn on there, but look at my LinkedIn, look at everybody's LinkedIn. What are they doing? LinkedIn is just another social media platform for business people. It's how you connect with people. It's also great to even post, because a lot of time when you post on LinkedIn, they have the way the algorithm works, right? If let's say Helen likes your post, and I just happen to have 3 research roles rolling through from Microsoft, and I'm like, oh, this person seems perfect. Helen knows this person. I want to reach out. So that's also another way to get yourself out there. And then let's go into job search. Well, actually, before that, I know we have Q&A at the end, but I'm open if you guys have any questions in the chat as well, and I can take a look. But I'm just gonna wait like 10 seconds. If no one does, I'm gonna move on to the next one. Okay, cool. Awesome. Job search. Man, what a topic. Job search is like another full-time job. It's like another full-time job. And the reason I say that is because you have to, it's almost like you're doing another job, which is you're recruiting, you're sourcing, understanding the qualifications, understanding what needs to be done in terms of your resume, tailoring that, connecting with people from that company, right? Like trying to connect with other researchers. So job search is like another job, especially if you are in a role right now. So with where we're at, with, layoffs that's been happening, with the economy being very volatile, I have some good news. Like, just because you're seeing those, there's still so many people hiring, so many people. And you guys are going to be surprised, but I've been seeing a lot of opportunities coming from Microsoft, and they are very much, it's like all different levels. So yesterday, for example, which I don't see a lot, mid-level researchers, 2 years of experience, right? And then I saw another one that's completely different, 6 years of experience. So I'll go into what that looks like, of, why also it's good to partner with your recruiter. But essentially giving you a little bit of an intel. So with my company in general, how it works is we have relationship with our clients and our manager. So when they have a role that comes through, we have exclusivity to it, meaning that we're not competing with other agency. So why is that good for you? That's good for you because you're not competing with 20, 30, 40 other applicants at all. And what that does is you can also get feedback right away. You understand what you need to do in order to make sure that you do really well in the second round. And then there's another route that we use, right? And that's through our vendor management system. And I know if these are foreign to you right now, essentially it's like applying on Indeed.com, where a lot of vendors, so not only TEKsystems, but other vendors also have opportunity to source for this particular role as well. With those roles, it's very random of what we'll get. So it might be developers, junior researchers, research associate, research coordinator. Those are really great, especially if you have talked to your recruiter before. They might remember, like, oh man, Megan, like I remember talking to her, and this role is looking at someone who has X, Y, and Z, and Megan has X, Y, and Z, and it's within the compensation that she's looking for. I'm going to call Megan, like, Megan, look, I'm going to submit you to this role. This is what I need from you. However, would you be open to me submitting you? Like, is that okay? It's always good to tell your recruiter, like, hey, you know what? If you see something, go ahead and submit me for it. Or, hey, I really want to be intentional about where I go. Can you please give me a call or email me the job description before you submit me? That's totally okay. But here are some of the questions that I know people get a lot of, our recruiters get a lot of, or some of the questions that job seekers might have. What are some of the common misconceptions about the recruiting industry? That we are, and I'm not sure if this is like a big misconception, but I would say that a lot of recruiters care. And I'm speaking from my team, I'm speaking from my company. A lot of recruiters care. We try our best just because we know how tough it is out there. We have like mini wins where we tell stories in our stand-up meeting of like, hey, you know what? We just placed Helen, like she was so great, like she's doing really well. Or we have an instant where we had a candidate that was on visa, right? And we had to do everything that we can to make sure that she doesn't get deported. And that's through making sure we get the job done, reaching out to our immigration team. Some recruiters do care. And sometimes people have bad experience with recruiters, and that's totally okay. But what I would say is, you know, pick and choose of who you work with and who you partner with, because some recruiters do care. Some recruiters, they truly are not ignoring you. And I'm saying some because they just are very overwhelmed. Just as much as you're overwhelmed right now, I can tell you I'm very much overwhelmed. I have to go after work, go climbing, go to a bouldering gym to just get my mind cleared off. So it can be very overwhelming from both sides. So, you know, just be kind, and recruiters are trying their best to help, and you're more than welcome to reach out if you ever need anything from your recruiters. And then I know that we went over some of the mistakes that maybe some candidates would say. So I would say when it comes to common mistakes, number one is not having a LinkedIn. I know it's kind of like a duh, right? It has happened to me before. Not having a LinkedIn, because it might be okay maybe a couple of years ago, but I would say if you don't have a LinkedIn, it's really hard, because a lot of time our manager also, or our recruiting coordinator, take a look at your LinkedIn to make sure that it matches your resume. So if your resume doesn't match your LinkedIn, for example, if your resume says UX researcher, and then your LinkedIn says research associate, that could be a red flag right there, right? So making sure that your resume and your LinkedIn matches. And then another one that I mentioned too is having a very good idea of what is it that you want to go into, whether that's UX research or design. If you want to do both, you can do UX generalist, right? Like that is also something that you can do. But I would say, and this is from my own personal view and a couple of my colleagues, is try to omit from saying, I can do anything and everything. It doesn't help us at all. I know you're trying to be flexible. It does not help us when you say anything and everything. You can say, hey, I'm open. I'm very much trying to get into UX research, but right now I am also open to possibly doing design if it includes research, right? So that way you're like, hey, like I might be open to that. Or, hey, I would be open to going to a research assistant role if it allows me to move up into UX research. And that, my friend, I'm telling you right now, that is also a potential. Meta does a lot of hiring for a research assistant. We have placed over, I think this year and last year alone, probably over 10 consultants within research assistant. And then with Microsoft, they a lot of time start up as a research coordinator, research associate, researcher one, right? And then like UX researcher. There are ways that you can get up there. Some people, they get UX research title right away. And that's, and I think there's two ways to go on about it, right? Of how you want to go. So all of that to say is have a clear understanding of what you want. And then I would say one more is, this one is more so for TEKsystems and other staffing agency. It's just having that sense of urgency, because roles do close very quick once they get candidates. So having your resume ready of like, hey, I know we're talking at 3 p.m., but here's my resume, right? If a recruiter doesn't read it before, that's totally okay. But one, it shows like, okay, like this person wants to work. That means it's going to be like, it's going to be a great partnership. Like this person wants to work. And what I do sometimes too is I take a look at resume and I can provide feedback right away. So having a resume ready is really great. If let's say you tell a recruiter like, oh, I don't really have a resume at the moment, or I haven't updated my resume since school, right? And let's say you have like recent projects. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a mistake, but it's going to help your case more to have everything all ready to go. Tan, I will promise you I will answer your question after this, I promise. And then Where do recruiters typically source candidates? Where, how do I increase my visibility? Well, Helen was through a referral. So again, network, because my first place that I go are the people that I work with. I say, hey Helen, I know that you mentor a lot of UX researchers, especially people who are moving from academia to UX research. I have 2 spots opening here at Meta. And because you understand how Meta works, who would you recommend me I reach out to, right? I need your top 5 candidates. So first, I ask for referrals because I trust my current consultant that they will recommend someone that is good for the role, right? So first, that's how I source my candidates, is through referral. Second is through my LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn and your LinkedIn are a little bit different. So I have my recruiter LinkedIn where I can filter out everything from education, years of experience, what school you go to, right? Sometimes our manager, let's say if our manager went to University of Washington and she's like a big Husky fan, I'm going to try to source my candidate from UW. So that way our manager can have that little bit of connection. But LinkedIn is also another one. And then also, I think my last thing would also be, so there's like LinkedIn for recruiters and also just my LinkedIn page where I will do a hashtag open to work UX research or open to work UX. So when I put that in the bar, it will accumulate all the posts on LinkedIn. That's relevant to me, right? And so I can easily do that. And then I also see a lot of when people like a post or anything, it pops up on my LinkedIn feed. So I would say I source my candidate through LinkedIn, through referrals, and also our internal database as well that we have. So once you talk to a recruiter, so let's say you do talk to one of my peer recruiter, your information will be in our system, so I can just give you a call. So those would be my top 3. What can recruiters see about candidates in the recruiter view on LinkedIn? What do they hope to see? I actually have a slide dedicated to that, so I won't go into too much. And then how can I make the most of my relationship with you as a recruiter? I would say, again, be very intentional about your search. Be nice, be kind to your recruiters, ask questions. Oh my gosh, please ask questions. I love questions because it actually also makes me think like, oh, this is something I should tell my candidate next time I talk to them, right? So I'm also learning from you, and just keep in touch, right? I try my best. I say, hey, you know what? Let's put a time on calendar 2 months from now and see where you're at. I know that you're in final interviews. If it doesn't pan out, let's reconnect.
Ploy, just to interrupt, should I be advancing this slide?
What was that?
Should I be advancing slides? I don't know when to go forward.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I'm just done with this slide now, so you can go on to the next one. So again, that was supposed to be something that I really want to emphasize, and I know this is something that you guys are probably really well aware of. Again, like recruiters, a lot of time we try our best, right? So just be nice, be kind, because that does go a long way. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put in the chat. And then I'm going to answer some of the questions. Can you share some descriptive data on volumes of open roles or any team using at the moment? What does the trend look like so far after the mass layoffs at the end of the year? So how it works with TEKsystems is I work with my account managers, and my account managers are separated by the clients. So we have Meta, we have Amazon, T-Mobile, Expedia, Edward Jones, Bank of America, right? So I am searching, connecting with different account managers from across the nation. So the roles that we have depends and varies week by week. Sometimes we have none, sometimes we have 1 or 2. I would say right now on average about, I want to say like 5 to 10. And half of those are through our vendor management system. So meaning that we don't have direct contact with the manager. And from the trend, I knew this from the beginning that from December, first quarter is going to be very rough, was going to be really rough. And then second quarter, our anticipation is that we will see more of an increase in jobs opening, because as company start to let people go, right, like these mass layoffs, they need someone to do the work. So there's been a lot more opportunity for contractors, right, to step into these roles, because contractors, they since they are employed through us, right, through a staffing agency, a lot of time they're not impacted by these mass layoffs, and a lot of time they can't just fire everybody on the team. That's just not smart in my opinion. So they're gonna reorg everything of like, hey, this is something that we really need. This is something that we really need to prioritize. So if you're not open to contracting, it's totally okay. But do some research of like, hey, even if it's for a 3 months contract, at least I have something on my portfolio, something I can talk about in the interview. But I do anticipate getting better. I want to say towards like midsummer, end of summer. And that's when I'm thinking everything will be good. Now, one thing I will say is, and this might be important for you, maybe not, understanding the company's fiscal year. So I'm giving you insight on that. Fiscal year, right, is for Microsoft, it's June 30th. So that's typically when they're reviewing their budgets and everything for the next fiscal year. So that's where a lot of last year, I'm not sure if you remember, where Microsoft had, they started early layoffs. So understanding, hey, what does that fiscal year look like? It's going to allow you to partner up with your recruiter and have that talk track and conversation of like, hey, I know that my contract is 18 months, but fiscal year is coming up at 6 months. Should I be worried? Who do I need to talk to, right? And a lot of time, I think other staffing agency may have this too, but we actually have an app called the Communities app where our consultants can take a look at what we see here and send it over to their recruiters. So we have like our monthly touch point of, hey, how are you doing? Are you liking the role? Are you interviewing elsewhere? And it's okay to say like, yeah, I am. I'm, like taking a look at other jobs because I don't know what it's going to look like. So it's totally okay. Be transparent. The last thing that we want is to be blindsided. And a lot of time we are just the messenger and we're here to inform you. And it's totally okay if you're ever frustrated, but just remember that a lot of time what we're bringing to you is either through our account manager, and from that is from our manager directly. And then let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And I think this will answer Megan's question. Attach your resume on there. If you can, I would attach your resume. And if you, let's say you don't want to be contacted by recruiters, right? Like you want to decide who you partner with, just don't put your phone number on there. You can put your email on there, just don't put your phone number on there. But I would say attach your resume and your portfolio if you have a portfolio, whether that is a PDF, whether that is a website, just because now, especially now, it wasn't like this about a year ago or two. Now a lot of our clients are wanting portfolios. So for example, I had a recent role that came through with Thermo Fisher, and they said, we are not going to look at candidates if they don't have a portfolio, right? So it's gonna be very hard for us to push back. What if you're like, hey, what if it's under NDA? Like, what would you do? Like, what if it's under NDA? Let's say you did like a consultant for a startup company that hasn't been released yet. There are some ways that we can go on about that. First, always ask when you're doing a project like, hey, is this under NDA? Is this something that I can present? All right. You can, and again, like this goes into legal, and I'm not an expert. I would do some research on it. But what you can do is creating kind of like a mock-up by, let's say it's a fintech company, and they're releasing this new feature, and it's under NDA, you can't talk about it yet, right? Let's say they're releasing a feature where you can use your phone. To pay for your rent. Let's say like there's like a phone that you can pay for rent by touching like a certain pad. I don't know. Let's say that, right? You can be very general of like, hey, this is something that I've done that deals with the payment processes between real estate owners and the realtor, like, whatever that may be, very general. And then say like, hey, this is the research question of like, this is why I'm doing it. And then this is the process of like my thinking process, right? And then if you said, I don't want to talk too much about it because then it could be a breach of NDA, then in there, what you can say is in your portfolio, when you're sending it over, you can say, due to NDA, I'm not able to disclose anything through this unless it's presentation X, Y, and Z. It's okay to say that, but at least they have an idea of like, oh, okay, Megan did something that has to do with banking. And since she is applying to Edward Jones, that is really relevant, whether that is with the payment, whether that's internal. She understands the complexity. She understands the privacy aspect of what it takes, right, to deliver each project, because when it comes to banking, you're dealing with personal information. So again, like do your research, right? That's what I always recommend is it's okay that it's under NDA, but at least tell us something. And the best way I say this is like, if you were to tell a 5-year-old what you're working on, like you would have to simplify it, right? You can't be like, oh yeah, we're working on this payment process for our B2B. No, you're like, oh, we're making it a lot easier for people to pay their rent. So, like very simple. And then you can also put like, here are some of the research methods. Here are the team members that I work with. So if you have a portfolio, those are always great. And again, like if you have any questions, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I love these things. I love looking at resume. And with portfolio, I tend to just find like the key points that I'm looking for. And then another thing on LinkedIn is recommendations. Like those are also great as well, that I think a lot of people overlook. Because let's say, Megan, so the reason I'm picking on you, Megan, is because you're right there. Let's say that you intern for TikTok, right? And we had a role with a manager who used to be at TikTok. And I'm like, oh, okay. She's at Amazon now, and she is looking for a UX researcher, right? I might call you up like, hey, Megan, I know we spoke last week. Do you know this person? And you might say, oh yeah, I do. I used to work with her. Hey, they're actually working on this internal platform for employee engagement. Would you be interested in learning more? Right? And then I might say like, and that's all about like networking too. So having a recommendation of like, hey, what have you done? Especially from someone that have mentored you before or seen you work. So having a professional reference. And then Helen, if you want to go on to the next slide really quickly. Okay, so there's two profiles here. Number one thing I would say is having a professional image on your profile picture, right? And that is so easy to do. Go ask your friend, be like, hey, let's do a photo shoot, whatever that may be. Just right here, have a professional picture, because there is presentation matters, especially if you're in UX. You know that presentation matters, right? And then I would say a lot of time people leave out about for some reason. they just say like UX researcher. And it's like, well, I already know that. I know that you're a UX researcher, but like, I want to know about you, right? Especially if, let's say you graduated from a school that really specialized in like AI or AR, VR, like I want to understand what you've done. And so this person I've actually have helped place twice. First was at Microsoft, and then at Microsoft, and then at Amazon. And then I almost actually placed her at Experian Health, but she got a full-time opportunity. And I was like, that's awesome, right? So having understand like, hey, who am I? Right? Like, what do I do? Like, who am I? Because guess what? Recruiters takes about 20, 60 seconds, myself, take about 20, 60 seconds on resumes and profiles. So you want to make sure that you highlight everything, and it doesn't have to be super long, but it has to grab my attention. What I know about her is like, okay, sustainability, that's like big for her. She was at Amazon. Okay, that's a pretty reputable company. Okay, well, product design, engineering, design thinking. Oh, she also loved tutoring, making things on the side. So she has a little bit of a hobby. That's great. I know that some of our clients, they're big on sustainability, right? So first, professional picture, high quality is best. I would invest, whether that's great lighting, whatever that may be. And then don't leave about me blank. Who are you? What do you do? What makes you unique? And then experience. Again, I don't know why people leave this part blank. And I put 2. So I also helped this person. I got him submitted at Amazon, but he got another role at Meta, which is totally fine, right? It's like, hey, you do what's best for you. But what I like is, even though this one, he was an assistant professor, right? I like that I can at least see what are some of the skills. What did he do, right? I typically recommend 2 bullet points if applicable, if you can, just because like right here, you can click see more. But just for me to understand, like, okay, like this person has actually done research on let's say like mobile devices, like actually working with user experience, not just like medical research, right? So having that there, like, do not leave it blank. If you need help on those, what I always recommend is going on the search bar on LinkedIn and search up UX researcher. Filter out, do like big companies like Meta, Amazon, or you can do agency like Answer Lab, User Research International. A lot of people who have been there for maybe a year or transitioned into UX research, you can see like, oh, okay, this is what they've done. So use the resource that you have, use the connections that you have, look at their profile, and see if like, oh, okay, like this person might be a good person to go off of. So don't leave it blank, whatever it may be. If it's under NDA, you can still write something there. I do believe so. And again, the reason that you don't want to leave it blank is, do you guys ever use Control F? I do all the time. I'm like, okay, my client is looking for someone with B2B experience with cloud software. Control F, cloud. Okay, none. Maybe she's done internal. Control F, internal tools. None. Okay. Might not be a great fit, right? But then I do, let's say the client also likes someone who comes from a background of, you know, has done like work with Salesforce before. It's like, okay, cool. Let's see. Salesforce. Oh, so this person actually has worked on like Salesforce internal tool before. Okay, let's connect, right? So sometimes our clients are very specific on what types of background that they're looking at. So when you leave it blank, it's almost like a guessing game of like, okay, does this person have that experience? Do they not? More times than so, like you may not, right? But you have that conversation and you say, hey, you know, I would be interested in other opportunities. That's totally okay. But just don't assume that we know what you do. as a recruiter, as much as I want to say like, oh, I understand everything with UX research, oh my goodness, I'm still learning. I am still learning. I still ask Helen every time. It's like, so how does that work? Oh, okay, like why would you do card sorting? Oh, surveys. So what tools do you use? Right? So like don't assume, like, especially when you say, you know, I use survey or hey, I conducted, sent out surveys. What tools did you use? Because a lot of time people will say, manager like, hey, we use SurveyMonkey here, or like we use Qualtrics, right? Or they say, and this is very real, I want someone who knows user testing, who knows how to use user testing. This is from Amazon manager that I worked with, said, if they don't know user testing, we wouldn't stack rank them first. So then as a recruiter, right, I'm like, okay, Control F, user testing. And if maybe, let's say you have user Zoom, because I know that they have, I think, merged together, if I'm not wrong. I still could reach out, but just being very descriptive, like, hey, I did this by using this. I did this using card sorting, A/B testing. One company that does a lot of A/B testing, even in research, UX research, is Lululemon. So if you ever want to work for Lululemon, every time I see a job description is A/B testing. It's very e-commerce driven. So that would be my little snippet of LinkedIn, is just making sure that you have a professional picture, have an about me, and then like, what did you do, right? Is it a contract? Is it a full-time? Help them understand. And the reason I say that is because for me, right, this doesn't make much of a difference, but at least helps me incline to reaching out like, hey, you're on a contract. When does it end? So that way we can set up a time a month before that. So that's how I think I would optimize like LinkedIn. And again, it's post content, right? Like post content. You guys have, I don't know how many people are in here. I think about 10, 11, right, Helen? I want to say, I'm not sure. But regardless,
I think I see 20.
20? Okay, 20 people. 20 people can like your post, and that can boost your posts. So utilize your network. Say, hey, I just posted this. Like, I would really love you guys to react to it, or at least like give me some insight. So again, don't assume. Let me know if you have any other questions. From Jay.
I have a question.
Oh yeah,
Can I interrupt?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so when you were talking earlier about making sure, like, you know, you have a good photo or like a professional photo, is this example that you're showing us here an example of good professional photo, or did you mean it to be like a human face?
Yeah, so when I say professional, really great question. Yes, I just didn't want to show her image. It could be, it doesn't have to be like professionally done by the studio or anything like that. As long as I can clearly see your face, it could be like behind flowers, but a professional photo media is not blurry. Like I have seen people where it's like a crop from the whole picture. I'm not sure if you guys have seen those. You can take it on an iPhone and just a normal like profile picture. You could do, I've seen this and I think it's a little bit more lenient, but you could also do not cartoon, I'm not sure what the name is, but like something like this that I show on there. But I think that's gonna be more relevant for like designers that I've seen versus researcher. So just make sure you're representing yourself at the best, right? They want to see your face, they want to see you know, your profile. So like whether you like it or not, like presentation does matter. Does that answer your question, Helen? Okay.
Yes, cool. That was helpful.
Awesome. Let's see here. Jay, this might be too broad question, but would you have suggestions regarding how to start a relationship with a recruiter in order to get my first foot in the door? I have reached out to a number of recruiters, but got no responses. I can't remember something's. Oh, I can't really think of anything that I've done differently or anything I really lack compared to my colleagues who have made successful transition to UXR without prior industry. So I feel really stuck. Oh my goodness, Jay, I am so sorry. I will say, and I know this is going to sound redundant, you just have to keep going, but be more intentional about the recruiters that you connect with. I would say, like, in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more, but there's also a different way that you can reach a recruiter, and that is through maybe your mentor, right, that you have worked with, or maybe that's through like some of your connections. So for example, if you connected with Helen knows a manager at Expedia, they're really great friends, and you're looking to learn a little bit more about the company and how she got her foot in the door, right? Like that could lead to relationship building. You're not necessarily saying like, hey, can you get me a job? As like, hey, I really want to understand your experience and your journey. And so you can say, hey, would you be open if I send over my resume to, let's call her Susie, like Susie, and then get her feedback. And Helen might say, let me just connect you two. Start that conversation. And then she might recommend like, hey, you should connect to our internal recruiter. If we do have anything more so like entry level or junior level, like I'll reach out to you. So I know it's very frustrating. I think those people that have seen success, those are who I would reach out to and be like, who's your recruiter? Like who's your recruiter? Can I talk to them, right? Because if, let's say, a recruiter placed your colleague, and this happens too, right? Place your colleague at Google as UX research or UX research assistant. More than likely or not, they have done that before to many other of your colleagues. So I would reach out to those people that have seen success and ask them like, what did you do? Like what, can I see your LinkedIn? Can I see your resume? Like, can we talk? Can you connect me with that recruiter? And I know sometimes people might think like, oh man, I don't want to ask too many questions. You got to ask those questions. You got to put your research thinking hat on and be like, okay, like what do I need to do here? What do I need to do in order to get me to this next level? So I would say continue connecting with people, but be very intentional about who you're connecting to. So that way you're not putting in a lot of your time. Another way too that I think people overlook is your professor that you work with. Like, hey, look at their LinkedIn profile. I'm more than likely sure that they have a LinkedIn profile. See like who they're connected to, right? Like, hey, I'm really having a hard time with this. Like, what do I need to do? So those would be my suggestions. And Jay, if you want to connect after this, I'm more than happy to. And then let's go to the next slide. Big question, academia to UX research. I know there are a lot of people, like I mentioned, that are looking to transition from academia to UX research, especially in the state of layoffs, and then also UX researchers flooding the market. So now you're not only competing with researchers who are looking to get into the industry, but you're competing with staff researchers, senior researcher, mid-level researchers. So first thing I would want you to do is give yourself grace. It's like, it is competitive out there. And not only within that, right? But like, it's very competitive in the market. So it's okay to take a step back and be like, okay, this is where you're at, but there's always a place for you guys to get your foot in the door. Like there's always, for example, startup is also a great example of like, hey, they might want to build a team, right? There's a lot of companies that are restructuring their research team. So they're hiring more of like a UX architect, or they're hiring a senior UX strategist to help with their research process. Like, what does this team need to look like, right? So there are still a lot of opportunities out there. And I know in the questions like, how might I boost my chance of getting hired? Again, that is just networking. You can have the prettiest portfolio, the best profile ever. But if you're not networking with people, it's not going to give you the visibility versus someone that does. Can I talk about successful past hire, what the successful recruit looks like, and what steps allow one to achieve this? Yeah, absolutely. So I personally don't see a lot of junior research roles coming through. It's more very like senior level. But what I have seen is like UX research assistant, UX research coordinator. And so when I talk about those things, sometimes they don't have the technical skill set that maybe a senior researchers may have. So during my phone call, I'm very much listening on like some cues of how does this person explain UX research? If I said, Nino, what is UX research? Or Tan, what is UX? Like, why does it matter? Does it come before design? What does that look like, right? Or I might say, Brian, what is usability testing? What's the point of it, right? Sometimes we get into this state of like, oh, okay, like go into the portfolios like, oh, I'm doing this, this, and this. I'm like, okay, but what is UX research? Like, what is it that you're trying to do? You're trying to tell a story, right? So really understanding what is the foundation of UX research or UX in general, like what are you trying to do? Your communication skills, because I know for sure that I am not a UX researcher, but I can tell when someone is very confident, I can tell when someone is passionate, and I can tell when someone has a very great way of articulating their thoughts. Those soft skills are so, so important. And that's why I don't like to put a lot of words in my presentations ever, because I want you guys to focus on like what I'm saying versus what's on the screen. So what is your, how do you communicate your process, like your research process, to someone that doesn't know research? And again, I'm going to go back to this. How would you tell a 5-year-old what you do? And that is harder than you think. So for me, I just tell people, I find them jobs that they like. But recruiting is so much more than that, right? But once you define like, this is what I do is like, as a UX researcher, I need to understand X, Y, and Z. Like, this is what I'm doing. So when you're talking to a recruiter, have a, and we had to do this too as a recruiter, but having a role play. Like, Helen, maybe I might come to Helen and be like, Helen, I have a call with a recruiter. Can we do a role play really quickly of how I should talk or like what I should say? If someone is going on a tangent, for example, I'm like, because I'm typing at the same time, I'm like, wait, okay, I'm a little bit lost. So being very clear and concise of like, what project that you have done, what did you do, what was the result, what was the recommendation? You don't have to go through your whole portfolio, but can you summarize everything that you have done, right? So that's going to be really important. Have some role play with your friends. Be like, hey, I need you to pretend that you're a recruiter. And then it's also okay. What stands out to me is someone that asks questions, right? Ask question of like, hey, I want to understand what is this project. Okay. Well, I want to make sure that I tailor my resume towards this project because I do have X, Y, and Z. So one that I have had probably recently was the person that I showed you guys prior in the slide, where she got her first job at like Microsoft. And then after that, like once you have something on your resume from a reputable company, it's a lot easier for you to move there to another company, right? So it's your communication skills, it's your portfolio, your resume, and then also your ability to articulate your thoughts. I would say like once you have that idea or once you have those skills, it's going to be really great when you're talking to a hiring manager because they're not going to be expecting you to know like very high level strategic research of like how that worked. They're really going to be honing in on like, okay, if this person, so if Tamara, for example, if Tamara is faced with a challenge, what would Tamara do? That's what they want to know. Like, what would Tamara do? What's Tamara's bias for action? Right? Like, what is Helen's bias for action? What's my bias for action? Gosh, like, what would I do? Problem solving is very much could be implemented into everything that you do. So whether you're a researcher, whether you're a PM, that is the big thing, because they have problems that they need to solve. And if you do, like, how do you handle pressure? And pressure, I don't mean by you are getting to a point where you're super overwhelmed, it's like taking a toll on your mental health, but it might be, hey, we're supposed to have 20 participants for this interview and only 10 showed up. Like, what would you do? I don't know, right? Like, what would you do? If the timeline was 3 months, but then it actually got decreased to 3 weeks, when you're prioritizing things, like, that will change. It's like, what would you do? Who would you talk to, right? Sometimes I do ask those questions because I just want to know how you think on your feet. And the good thing is you can read on the internet. Like, these are some of the questions that they ask, and there are some of the answers, right? What's going to make it unique is if you have an experience that really tailors to that, of like, hey, this is what I've done, for example, right? Like, I was like, because the timeline is approaching and our recruiters were on PTO, from my last experience as a research recruiting coordinator, I understand how to use X, Y, and Z. So I partner up with my senior research manager to understand X, Y, and Z. Again, I don't know research too much, but having like that approach of, okay, take a step back, this is what I'm looking at, right? And then I think lastly, what I would say too is it takes practice. So just keep practicing. STAR method is also really good, a really good method too when you are talking to anybody, not just like hiring manager. I would practice using STAR method, right? Like and if you don't know what STAR method is, definitely look it up. Amazon is huge on the STAR method and leadership principle. Okay, cool. And then let's go to the next slide here really quickly. Okay, so here's another alternative. And I know that Helen mentioned that there may be some people from Answer Lab as well. This is a really great way to get your foot in the door. And here's why. You get to work with different clients. A lot of time, our manager will say, hey, I really want someone from an agency background because, one, they know how to communicate with vendors. So they know exactly what types of questions, they understand the environment, right? When you're working in a consultant firm, it's very fast paced. It's very much like go, go, go. You have tons of projects. You get exposure to working with different companies like Twitter, Microsoft, Amazon, right? Because these people, some company outsource their research. So what I would say is take a look. User Research International. I remember talking to someone, a candidate, she's actually in Seattle here, and she started out at User Research and was there for about 5 years. And if I can remember correctly, she either got a job at Expedia or she's still there. But like, take advantage of these like consultant, like research companies. I listed a couple. The one that I know the most is because I'm in Seattle is User Research International. But you can definitely search up of like, okay, what are some of the other things out there? And I know there are people in here who are like trying to transition from agency, like these consultant agency, to more of in-house because they want to work in in-house. I understand that also you're competing with other researchers as well. There's always a way. Like my answer is going to be the same thing, is that just keep networking, understand understand your strength. Like, I don't think people know a lot about their strength, and also the area of, opportunity for growth, right? Like, when you are coming from these companies, you understand the environment, you are quick on your feet, great bias for action, you have full visibility of B2C, B2B, internal, cloud, like everything. So what I would say to that is, like, be open to these types of companies as well, because a lot of time, if you see people leaving these firms like User Research International, Answer Lab, like User Zoom, you can also connect with them. Be like, hey, I used to work with this person. I was like, hey, like, I see here that you're now at Meta. Like, how did you get there? Right? So try your best. I would say try, unless another opportunity comes through, is if you're in these agency environment, try to stay for at least like a year or two, especially if your first year of experience is UX research. I know there's a lot of shiny things out there of, hey, we can pay more, or like, even I do this, right? Of like, oh man, I can go here and I can get paid way more. But I want you guys to think long term when it comes to your career. I'm not saying that it's always this is always the way it goes, but when you have years of experience under your belt, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to make that transition, right? Unless it's very toxic work environment and you just need a new place to work, that's totally okay. But try to stay as much as you can. If you're, let's say, like, you've been there for 4 months and you get reached out by a recruiter, it's like, hey, I might have something here for you, right? And I've done that. I was like, hey, I might have something here for you from Microsoft. That's a little bit more on the junior level end, right? But when I get on the phone with them, I don't push. And I might be different than other recruiters. I don't push. I will only push to see like what you're truly like hesitant about, because I will say like, hey, for like coming from someone who have like been in this industry, I do not like, last thing I want is for you to be on this contract and then getting let go. So you need to know if this is something that is worth it for you. Like, would you rather stay here for 4 months, but I can pay you, like 20 grand more if you come over here, right? Like, the grass is not always greener on the other side. And I always tell them, I was like, hey, stay there. We're connected on LinkedIn. Maybe there's something that comes through that's more full-time or like contract to hire. Let's connect through there, right? So overall, like, that would be my suggestions as always. It's like, hey, just stay connected. I would do my best to connect you with someone that I know. An example that I can think of, this person that I have worked with, she is on a certain visa. And a lot of time we have our vendors that we work with that supports the visa. And I was actually recruiting her for Edward Jones, but she wanted to focus on it full time. And I said, that's totally okay, right? And I connected her with Populous, which is one of our vendors that we work with. And then next thing you know, I'm not sure, I think it's from Populous, but there's like certain ways that it works. But then she's like, hey, like, she just reached out to me. She's like, hey, thank you so much, like, for all of your help with your resume and like with your resume help and then like communication. I just got a job at Google for 6 months, a contract. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Because I remember talking to her and I said, hey, whenever you need help, just let me know. And that's through her communication with the vendors and what that looks like, right? Because when you are on a certain, like when you have a certain like work authorization, sometimes it does require another vendor that we work with. So your recruiters, sometimes they have a lot of resources. You just got to ask. You might say, hey, I'm looking to move to Canada, right? So that would be TN visa. Like, what does that look like? And that could lead to something else. So all that to say is ask questions, learn more about these agency. I know that once we get to a certain period, hopefully in our economy will be able to be a little bit more at ease. So if you guys have any questions, please let me know, but I think we're gonna go ahead and look at the case studies. And then Helen, I'll probably have you help me with that because I can't share my screen. If you want to click on, I think TAN portfolio.
By the way, there were some questions in the chat. Should we wait till the end of this?
Okay. Yeah. I just want to make sure we have time, but.
Sorry, I do want to make sure we have time for the case study. So I'm sure to do it.
Yeah. No, I can take a look really quick. Ploy, can you share a bit about the level of roles we should be aiming if we've been professional? We've been in professional 10 years in my case. So, Sarah, when you say 10 years, do you mean like 10 years of UX research or 10 years including academia? Because as a professor, okay, yeah. So here's how some recruiters look at it. I would say Meta is very much flexible and very open to people who have a PhD or coming from professors background. That's not like that with everybody, right? So when you're looking at research, and it really does depend on the job that you're looking at, but for me, essentially, they don't count those years. And I'm just being like completely honest from the manager. But I have seen like that at Meta with like, hey, if they have a PhD, Meta is like big on PhDs. Like, hey, they have PhD and maybe like 1 year of experience, like that's totally okay. So I would say if you see a job posting and you want to apply to it, I say why not, right? Like you never know if you feel like it's applicable with your experience. If you're working with a recruiter and they're asking about like, hey, do you have years of experience? I would be very transparent and said, hey, I do have 10 years of experience as a professor working in research, right? Like I have working in research, and here are some that might be more so like UX driven that I can show. So I would say I say if it's a job posting, why not? But I would also aim for maybe like 2-3 years of experience as well. Because like UX, sometimes they look at it completely different. And that's from my personal experience when I'm looking at jobs for my candidates. So it might not be the same for everybody else, but that's from my personal experience. When you're currently in a contract role, what's the earliest you need to reach out to recruiters for your next role? What does timelines look like? Example, currently recruiters reach out with interview for a contract role next week while I'm still working at my current role. How do you maintain relationship with recruiters while politely turning down their offers? Okay, I really appreciate this question. I guess I would say, when does your contract end? That would be my first question. It's a little bit different because for me, I try to check in with my consultant every 30 to 45 days to see like, hey, how are things going for you so far? I would say it could be as early as like 60 days. 60 days or like 30 days prior, and just say like, hey, I'm very much interested. What does that look like? Because sometimes recruiters, if they are working with like multiple consultants, right, like they might just have missed the like your end date, right, that's coming up. So it's totally okay to reach out. I want to say 60 days prior is good to start talking about it, of like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. Can we schedule a time to talk about it? Like, do you know what the extension looks like? Do you know if like we should be looking now? And then let's see. And if you want to turn down their offer, it's totally okay to say, hey, I just don't think this is the best fit for me right now. As much as I do want to move to another role, I want to weigh it out in case I do get an extension. And you need to be able to make that judgment yourself, right? And if a recruiter gets offended or mean or rude, that says a lot about the recruiters and not you. So it's totally okay to turn them down and say, hey. I mean, that's what Helen did in terms of like before I started walking, politely, like before we started working together, she said, hey, like I'm just not interested in this role. I'm like, okay, sounds good, right? Like being transparent, like, hey, yeah, this just I'm turning down this opportunity, and that's totally okay. They should be able to say, hey, congratulations, I hope you really love what you do and let's reconnect, right? You can also say like, hey, right now I don't think I'm in a good place to accept the offer. I am currently looking at X, Y, and Z. Can we set up a time a month from now in case I change my mind? And some recruiters will try to say like, like you're losing out on this opportunity, X, Y, and Z. Because I know all the tactic and I don't like going that route. Like I will just tell you, I will try to push back and be like, have you considered this? My goal is just to get you thinking. My goal is not for you to accept any offer, but just make sure you think ahead of time, like, hey, what is it that's really important to me? It goes back to your top 3, right? So I would say just turn them down politely, just say, hey, I'm not looking at the moment. And then if you're in a contract and looking for a new role, I say as soon as like before 60 days end, like why not give that conversation to talk about? So that's totally okay. As long as one thing I will say too is talk to your recruiter about this. But if you're looking to cancel an interview 30 minutes before, it typically doesn't look too great for on yourself. It's totally okay if you're like, hey, I'm not interested anymore. I would always recommend like, hey, go through it and then make that decision. But if it's like an hour before, it's totally okay. But when it's like 30 minutes to 10 minutes before, it's just it can come off as if like, okay, well, it's not much of a good look. I'll put it that way. So just make sure that you communicate like, hey, I'm seeing an offer coming through. So if anything, right, like I want to go through with this interview. I was like, hey, if an offer comes through, like I don't want to interview, right? So like giving a recruiter heads up. So that way, if let's say it is 30 minutes before of like, hey, I got an offer, right? We could tell the managers like, hey, by the way, like this person has this coming through. So they might not be able to go through with this process. And the manager's like, okay, like I completely understand, but just having that communication is going to be very much like worthwhile. Any other questions?
Ploy, can I ask a quick follow-up question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you said that when so to really connect to the recruiter, it's good to use the like referral. So to ask my friend who got the job at the company, can I talk to the recruiter who you worked with and when you got your job? And I was thinking that if I know that that company is not really hiring like UX researchers, what would be the incentive for that recruiter to talk to me and then to connect with me? So if I feel like I'm asking like too much favor for my like colleague to like ask that person to like connect with me. So like do you see what I'm saying? Like will that recruiter like to connect with me?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And that was also is it Gia?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a really great question. So a lot of time I do that too. I'm like, well, this person already has a full-time, like, why would they be looking? Like, what's the point of me reaching out? A lot of time our brain, just the way it is, it just starts thinking before, think about like the worst thing possible, right? And then I think that also shows that like you're making sure that you are not bothering them, which is a good thing to have. But if I know anything from anything at all from this whole session, the one that Helen set up, right? People want, like, they want to help. They really do. So when you're asking someone, right, even if they're not hiring, it's totally okay to be like, hey, look, I really, like, be personal, right? Hey, I saw your profile. I really like the way that you made that transition. And as someone who is making that transition, can we talk a little bit more on what that journey looks like? And they might say, oh yeah, absolutely, right? Or like, oh, I'm really busy right now. Like, so I'm not available to talk, right? And you can say, hey, you know what? On to the next. Hey, that's totally okay. Thank you so much. On to the next person. I guarantee you, like, just there are people out there that wants to help. And when you talk to them, they'll say, oh, I work with this recruiter. You should talk to this person. And I mean, that's how that's exactly what this person did for me, like how I got this job, right? It's like, hey, who did you talk to? Like, let me talk to them too, right? And I think it's more so how you choose to build that personal relationship with that person. Mm-hmm. And I know sometimes it feels like, especially I can speak from my culture, for my culture, it's very much like, I don't want to bother you. Like, I'm just going to like keep to myself. I had to break out of that, and I had to ask questions of like, for what I want. So there are ways of going on about it. Like, hey, I really do admire your work, and, be genuine. Like, this is something that I would love your perspective on, like love your perspective on. So in terms of like, what's in it for them? Well, the fact that like they're helping you, like making an impact. 9 times out of 10, when I talk to candidates of like, hey, what is it that you want to do? 9 times out of 10, they said, I want to make an impact. And that impact is very different for everybody. So I want you to get out of that mindset of like, I don't want to bother them. If someone says no, all right, that's totally okay. Thank you. On to the next. So just don't get discouraged from asking those questions for yourself, because you do offer value, right? Like you are offering value. And you're making that person feel like they're helping someone. And if you go through this experience, you can also help other people as well. It's like, hey, I've heard 10 no's before I got a yes. So you just got to keep going. For me, before I became a recruiter, it was during 2020. So everything was closed down. I probably got like, gosh, I applied and applied. I probably got a rejection per week for the times that I've been applying for like 3 months. And then I even got a rejection after I got the role at TEKsystems because they were delayed. So just keep going. I know it's harder. It's easier said than done, but you just got to ask those questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. Okay.
Yeah, I don't see anything for now. We have about 25 minutes left.
Okay. Let's go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm going to say one thing.
Yeah.
For everybody who's here, there is another session that I'm running on May 6th, which is about framing impact on your resumes and portfolios. So I will be collecting examples from you guys of lines from your CVs or resumes that you're having trouble translating into something more impactful, or statements from your portfolio that you're just not really sure how to either make it vaguer so that it fits under NDA, or just like talk about impact when you've just run the study and you don't quite know what the impact is. So Janine will circulate a survey link today. I guess Janine, you can go ahead and share it now if you'd like. please do fill out the survey. It should be very quick. I left most of the questions optional, but do send me some examples of tricky lines from your resume, statements from your portfolio that you're struggling with, because I would like to actually use them in the presentation for May 6th. Okay, back to you, Ploy. I will advance the slide. Just a second to mute.
Yeah, so I think for the PDF, you'll probably have to open up on your end. But I'm gonna go ahead and open that up on my end too. Okay, so here's my thing, right? I am, I would say I'm not like an expert when I am looking at portfolio. And what I mean by that is I know what I'm looking for. But when it comes to content and everything, I know Helen is hosting an SS session. So I'm going to tell you from my perspective of like what I look for. So first is, I know it sometimes is not as important as a UX design portfolio, but what I look for is like, okay, is it pretty easy to read? Like, can I get the gist of what this person is doing, right? Within like 2 minutes. I love the fact that one thing sometimes people do forget is they don't say like what their role is. It does happen. And I'm like, so what did you do? Were you a designer also and a researcher? So I think like right off the bat, I'm like, okay, this person was a researcher. Here are the research type: discovery, generative, primary research. Here are some of the methods, deliverables, and tools. One thing I would ask, or I would add on there, and if it's already in here, great, but I think it's also about how you lay out your information, right? So what was the timeline? And the reason I say this is because let's say that my company is looking for, or our client is looking for someone who has done a lot of sprints, a lot of like 3 weeks turnaround, who can handle like multiple projects. Some companies might be a couple of months, right? If they're doing more so of like a strategic research. So I just want to understand like, what's the timeline like? And did you work with anybody else, right? Like, who is your collaboration partners? A lot of the bullet points that you see in job descriptions is going to be working cross collaboration with product managers, with developers, engineers, designers. And for you, if you're transitioning from, let's say, like strictly from academia, you might not have those opportunities. But I also want to see, like, did you have partnership with someone? Maybe that is with a senior researcher, or that you have like worked with before, or maybe with another researcher, because 2 is better than 1, right? Like to have 2 heads of like, okay, well, if I think this and I have someone to at least have that same mindset, or at least give me a new perspective, like how is my collaboration skill with other teams? And then I always look at like, what is the background, right? So this one is improving order status communications for insurance products. I love how like direct that is. And it might seem small, but I'm like, okay, this person is exactly what they're doing, right? Like, this is about for insurance product, research motivation. After receiving annual comments, want to design a page to communicate with the user the status of their insurance order, but they were unsure of the benefit. So I love, that's like the background, like why they're doing it, right? So my first thing, and Helen, you might be better than this than me, but I always look at like literally writing it on there of like, what's the research question? Like, I just want to know, like, before you even get into the process, the methods, like, what's the research question that you're trying to solve? And then it goes into, okay, here are the process, here's my thinking, here are my deliverables. And if I search up, right, Control F, recommendations. Okay, got it. Conclusion, impact. If you're able to, I was like, okay, what would be your recommendations? And maybe that is completely a separate paragraph of like, here are my recommendations. right? Like, what is it? Because what I'm seeing is I presented detailed findings in my recommendation to the product manager, designers, business analysts, and key executives. Great. Like, could you put in like at least one recommendation that you did? A company codes and recommendation on next step product strategies. Just having like one recommendation of like, what was that recommendation is great. Like, that was something that I searched up when I was looking at this portfolio. I was like, okay, so he presented his detailed findings and then also his recommendation, but I just want to know what it was. So I just go through, there's like different steps, right? There's what is the background? What is the role? Who did this person work with? Oh, they work with a lot of salespeople. That's great because at Snapchat, they are working within the SMB, small business owners. So if they also work with a lot of sales teams. So if this person had worked with sales team, great. So who did you work with? Even if you put in there that you provided like recommendations to product managers, designers, and business analysts, you have to understand that for a recruiter, it's very fast of like, I'm going to find the keywords, and the easier you make it for a recruiter, the better. So that is something that, you know, I would recommend. But then again, I would say one thing, and if let's say your resume does say that, it does help with like, okay, so I understand a little bit more. Because typically for me, it's kind of the opposite of a designer. So our recruiting partner, they typically look a lot at the designer's portfolio first, right? And then their resume. So for me, I look at your resume, and if your resume doesn't tell me anything about your like processes, that's where your portfolio comes in. Like, oh, okay, this is what this person has done. So that would be like my only thing when I'm just like briefly looking at portfolio. Do you have any questions there or anything that you want to add, Helen? I'm not sure how we want to do this because I want to make sure we have some time too.
I just wanted to make sure I was still in. That was great. Is there any particular advice, like if you had to give one piece of advice to Tan here, what would it be?
Yeah, the one piece that I would say is if it's not, if there's an information that you can put on there, I love that there is a conclusion and an impact, right? Maybe you're not able to share the recommendation, but I always look at the research question. And that is coming from someone who doesn't do UX research right away. So the way my brain is wired is like, okay, there's each step of research, right? Even if it's already like input in there in like the research motivation, just having that fun, like, this is the research question. This is what I'm trying to solve, right? So if we think back to like UX, user experience, we're trying to make sure it's easier for our users, right? So think of it that way, like how can we simplify that? So I would say just adding that in there, if it's already in there, just making a separate section for like research question. But I think overall, I love how clean it is, and I love how easy it is to navigate. With research portfolios, I know you don't need a lot of visual as well. And maybe this is more so for a presentation in the interview. But also another thing I would add is if you have done anything that revolves like doing surveys or data, like having that on there is also a plus, but it's not necessarily. Sometimes managers just want to know like what you've done. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love all this. I'll start implementing them.
Thank you so much, Tan, for sharing the example with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a brave thing to do. Sharing your work and too. Okay. Thank you, Writing Center. Okay. So right away, for me, again, this is my personal preference. I do love when people do like their own website, because sometimes when we submit candidates, they're not able to open a PDF, but that is like very few. But right off the bat, like I'll tell you, I was like, okay, just me personally, I was like, how I would break these up is maybe having a picture or something, right? Like, again, it doesn't have to be like visually like aesthetics. You don't need wireframes and all those things like design portfolios, but having like maybe a picture at the center or between the background and summary of findings. I love the fact that it's very clean. I'll say that from the beginning, like it's very clean, very easy to follow. There's the background, summary of findings, methods, tools, process, data analysis, right? Survey questions. I would add, like, if you don't have any pictures that you want to put, what were the data? Like, what did that look like in the, I don't know if you use Excel sheet, but like, what did that look like? And if you do have those, cleaning it up and putting it on there can help, and it goes a long way. Just making it look nice, like, hey, these were the surveys that I did, and I can easily look at them like, oh, okay, like these were the volume. You sent out 3,000 surveys, right? Like, oh, you sent out 300 surveys, and like here were your findings. So just having some images on there, as you know, like recruiters going through, just helps them understand better, right? And then it just breaks up the paragraph a little bit better than if it were just like straight on like words. And then this is something that I think would be very helpful is these paragraphs, like they're awesome, but just try to be very like simplify like what were some of the, like what is the background, like in very short. I would put it as like maybe 4 sentences of like, hey, what's the background of this? Something that I can read right away, like, okay, I understand this writing center assessment. A quick summary of findings. And if they want to read more, here's something that I find that's very helpful is if you have a website, right? If they want to go into more details, having a hyperlink. It's like, click here for more of my summary of findings. That way you're not losing all of this content, but you're also making sure that our readers are really reading it through, like what you have done. So really understanding how to articulate your thoughts of like, hey, this is what's important that I want to tell you, right? And then what is the research question? It's always my thing. I always look for a research question, right? What is it that you're trying to do before you go into the methods and the tools? Excel, okay, so you use Excel, so that's great. Like, I want to see some data in there, and images, right? You can use maybe Tableau, you can use Excel, but image does go a long way. Little things do go a long way. The processes, so for me, for some reason, and maybe this is just me and my colleagues, is we like to see like 1, 2, 3, and 4, or like bullet points. It just, in a way, it breaks up a little bit better, right? And then constant, I love this, and I'll tell you why. We talked about bias for action. We talked about your problems of like, hey, what did you encounter when you were doing this, right? So this one, since the participants took the survey remotely, I could not answer any clarifying questions or ask them elaborately on their responses. I also could not prevent participants from misreading questions and or providing partial responses. So that is really good. Like, I really highlight that. I was like, hey, this is a big thing. And then you can even elaborate on like, here's why, right? In short form, like, here's why. Like, why is this constant? Like, why is it important that our participant took this remotely, right? But then that also led to, you couldn't answer any clarifying questions. So why is that important? So if I were to ask you something, right, Brittany, I was like, hey, Brittany, I don't understand what you mean by this, right? So is the problem like, so then when you're looking at research, you're like, okay, so is the problem really like, are the way I ask the questions, or are they like misreading the questions, right? Or is this really true data? So at the end, that could be, hey, like here are some of, I don't know the word for it, but I'm just thinking back of when I did all of like my science, like there's like a hypotheses and there's conclusion, and there's ones like, hey, this is what could have led to inaccurate data, or like this is something that we also have communicated concerns for, right? And this is how I navigate through it. So I want to call you on that one. I love that. So one thing, I love that you have the recommendations on there. That's great. The impact, like these are all great content. My only recommendation is if you can put some kind of image in there, I think that would really make it a lot better for readers to kind of section out their, like when they're reading through all of this. So whether that's their findings or not. Any questions?
The only question I just include a picture of the like a screenshot of the Excel sheet, like the responses on them. Was that what you're talking about?
Yeah, great question. So it doesn't have to be, it could be like the data, like after you work with maybe to like clean up the data, right? So it doesn't have to be like single responses, but it could be, hey, this is what is shown, right? Like this person has more of this and this person has more of this. So I'm thinking very basic, like image. And when you say like a screenshot, I would go the extra mile to, instead of doing like a screenshot of like actually creating like a data visualization where it shows, hey, like X, Y, and Z, right? You can screenshot it, but just make sure you clean up those data before you screenshot those. So that way it doesn't look like, like raw data almost. It's like very complete, like, hey, this is what I've done. This is what I've done to accumulate all of these, because eventually, if you think about it, you're going to be presenting these to maybe the business people or the stakeholders, and they don't understand UX research, right? Like you are the subject matter expert. So one of the things that comes with being a UX research is to advocate for your research. Because some companies, they don't have the structure that maybe other companies have, where research is very much appreciated, and that's just me being transparent. So like having those like data, like visualization, help them understand like, hey, like these were my findings, right? Here's how I want to advocate for this research that I've done. So you can definitely screenshot it. Just make sure that the data is very clean and very easy for your stakeholder to digest. Because when the hiring manager is looking at that, sometimes they're product managers that are hiring. Sometimes they're not UX research manager, because some companies don't have the capacity to have like a full-on UX research team. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, cool. There, we can click on another one. Okay, let me also open that one here. Helen, that one is PDF, right? Service portal? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Perfect. Okay. So one thing I want to say is, if you don't have a website or you don't have a portfolio, I love the fact that you at least have a PDF, especially with where we're at right now. It's turning into an expectation to have a portfolio. Optimizing a library employee service portal. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to go ahead. Research finding, service portal. Great. Background context. In October, the information live employee service from customized on-prem version on cloud-based version. So, okay, great. Well, as a UX researcher, set out to answer these questions. Key research questions. Nice. Okay. I love that. Live study goals. Interview library employees who had, okay. User interview script, excerpt, interview service. Okay, my role in this study. So one thing I will say right away, if you are doing a PowerPoint, make sure that your font are the same, that they are consistent. At the end of the day, you are a UX researcher, so aesthetic may not be as important, but making sure that your portfolio is clean is going to be very much something that I would recommend. These research methods and interview script, I'm not sure if this is something that you can zoom into or click into, but what I would say is if it's a portfolio, I think you can definitely include like a link on there or something that they could look at, because if I were to look at this, I would try to zoom in, and sometimes it's just like really hard of what that is. I do appreciate that you know, like screenshot it, but I would make it like maybe a table or maybe like a PDF that they could click on. Moderate interviews with 6 user internal libraries, ITs, and 6 external users. I love the numbers on there. I'm very much someone that advocates for, if you see something and it's quantifiable, do it. I'm assuming that you're, you know, these are the people that you interview, or maybe these are, I'm not sure, and they're okay with you using the images, but just making sure that if you are using their image, that they are okay with that. And then qualitative user data rainbow spreadsheet and impact effort metrics. So this one might be a little bit different, right? Because if you're really presenting, I'm all in for pictures, images, right? And then you explain like, hey, this is what the data looks like, and this is what I'm doing. Let's see here. So if you're presenting, that's totally okay, but they might ask like, okay, what is the data? And that's a conversation that you can have with a recruiter. So just being like audible ready, like, hey, this is what the data is for, this is who it's for, and this is what it describes. And then next, overview, right, great. We were wrong about, we were right about surprises. Okay, I like how easy it is for me to, oh, Helen, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I like that you use the emojis. It's very quick to like, oh, okay, this is not like, this is what they were wrong about, this is the positive what we're right about. Having that in there versus just text is also really nice. What I would say is with these, you also, like, as much as you want like the picture on there, just make sure, I would like try to get rid of the white borders, right? Just to make it a little bit more so less choppy if you care about aesthetics. But it does go a long way if you want to take the time. Maybe that is like putting in a little border to make sure it's consistent and like the same size. But other than that, it's very simple, very easy to read. Findings, what we heard, right? So great, you have analysis on here. That explains all of this, right? For me, that's good for me as a recruiter of, okay, they have the analyses, it's posted on there. Obviously, I would probably ask you what this means. Confusing choices, observation. Got it. 2 other things we heard. I'm just going to click through these really quickly. Migrating from authentic obstacles. I love that you have the obstacles on there. Recommended next steps, recommendation. Next steps for the stakeholders, appendix notes, overall theme frequency. Okay. And I'm not sure if this is on your slide, but what I would even go on to understanding is, what is it that you've learned? Like, get personal. It's like, hey, like, this is what I learned from this study. Whether it's like, I was completely like, these were my hypotheses. This is something that is continuous. And this is something from my my time recruiting for Meta is they have that star, right? STAR, but at the end, they also want to know your reflection of like, what did you learn from all of this? Like, how could you, what were some of the things that you found that could have been more helpful, or could have been like that next step? Because one research can lead to another. Like, an exploratory research can lead to something else, or like evaluative research can lead to something else. So it's always about, hey, like, this was the research question, but we actually found out that this happened. So my recommendation for this one, and again, like, this is from my personal view, is 29 page is totally okay. I would try to like just condense it just a little bit. I'm not saying like for every role, like I would have this, but if you want to have like a pretty thorough like portfolio, this is it. But for me as a recruiter, I just want to take a look at like, hey, what were some of the findings? What did that look like? What were some of the data? I know sometimes with portfolio, it's very much, if it's on a PDF like this, it takes a little bit of time to click through. So my recommendation would just be like making sure that, one, your font, everything is consistent. Once it's not, it becomes a little bit choppy. It's something that I notice a lot, and I always tell my consultant, and this is something too with resume, is their font is not consistent. One thing that they could get away with is probably if their name is in a different font, in a different color, but making sure that your presentation is well representation of who you are. You don't have to be a designer, but having someone taking a look like, hey, I want you to be honest with me of like, how do you feel, right, about these, about my portfolio? Just like go through quickly, glance, like, what do you feel? Do you understand? I think you do a really good job of breaking it down, and that's why it takes a couple of slides. But other than that, I think just making sure that, you know, everything is consistent and all of your images are also consistent as well. And then providing that last nice to have. It's not like that with every company, but a last nice to have of, hey, this would be really great if I would have done this. This is the reflection. This is what I've learned. So any other questions there?
Ploy, we have one more case study that's from a workshop attendee, and then one that's from an industry person. So I wonder if time for can everybody like 5 more minutes?
Yeah, I have time for 5 more, or it's not 5 more. I do have time for 2 more. I'll make sure to go through it briefly. Again, like, you know, Helen is probably going to be very much very helpful on this. I'll go through in terms of aesthetics of like what I look for. So I'll make sure to go pretty quick. And if you have, again, Helen posted my LinkedIn on there. If you have any questions, just reach out to me after. But yeah, let's go through 2 more, and we'll go from there. Okay. And this one is also a case study, right? Or is that a website? That one was a website.
This one's a website.
Yeah. Okay. Behance. Okay. Internal mindset, progressive web app duration, 8 weeks. Great. Abstract, my role, scope, what did I do? background. Okay, so right away, what I would say is break up that background and analysis, right? So if this title is going to be in the middle, make sure the background is in the middle. If background is going to be skewed to the side on the left side, make sure analysis is on the left side. Again, even though aesthetic is not as important as design portfolio, your presentation does matter. So just make sure that that is scoot to the side. But one thing I do love, I want to call out, is that very much you know what your role is, the scope, what you do, and the timeline. 8-week weekly sprint from concept to production. That's great. One thing before we even go into the analysis, I would be like, well, what was the research question? What is she trying to solve, right? What is it? And it might be on there. Like I said, it might be on here already, but I want like a bold letter of like research question is, even if that means repeating what you just said. Analysis. Love that you have this empathy map. You can zoom in on it, right? Not sure you can zoom in on it, but that's great. Synthesis, data, solution, design, preference and usability testing. The only thing I would say is like moving that preference and usability testing to the side. I think it's also the placement of stuff on your page, right? But I think it's like very easy to navigate. You got the heat map, so understanding insight helps us determine design change for the record audio feature, which is great. You describe the intent of why, additional deliverables. So I would just make sure, I think it's more so the placement of the page, and I'm talking about where you are at for like preference and usability testing. Because if you go down, right, like I would just make sure that it's very consistent of like where you put the topic and what goes where, and like, is this part of the deliverables? Is it part of the insight? I think this page, it would just take me a little bit longer to look at it. Things I would do again, constant communication with developers, clear goals, transparency, test and test and test. I love that. That's a reflection right there. Things I'll do again. Challenges. Also love that. I want to know what you go through, because I know that research is not smooth sailing all the time from talking to a lot of people. I would even highlight, I would do like, hey, this is something that was a challenge, was building to, I discovered that the scale built into user barrier had icon listed from difficult to easy, left to right. A majority of the user responses were all the same. I think the rating were skewed because in subsequent question, user identified what they would change, and those explanations did not match up with the, is it Likert selection? Sorry if I mispronounced. This have been a flaw in the user barrier design or my questions. I would be more cognizant going forward. Okay, so the challenge, like, I think that's great, right? I would even bold or highlight as certain things that would stand out of like, it could be a design in the question, the ratings were skewed, right? Testing tools, 6 different platforms before setting with user barrier to conduct. I like the fact that you have, these were the challenges, but this is what I'm gonna do going forward. The impact is great. So my recommendation would be making sure that you, when you are putting things on your page, on your portfolio, that it's very consistent, like cohesive, and that I can easily say like, this is her insight, this is the deliverables. If your topic's gonna be in the middle, make sure everything is in the middle. Because for you, if it's because it's like all in one page, it's more than ever that it has to be consistent, versus if it were like on a web page, right? It might be a little bit different. So just making sure like things I do again, and then challenges. For me, I would say things I do again, if you want to put it in the middle, it has to be a little bit more centered. And then, so that way it aligns with challenges. or challenges has to be a little bit more centered so it aligns with both impact and things I'll do again. Again, these are small little things. Any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, cool. Then one more, right, Helen?
So for context, the person who created this study is not here with us today, but this is someone who's currently working in industry, and this is something they prepared back in 2020 before they entered industry.
Okay. Got it. So this person is working. What was that?
This one's a PDF. In case you're opening it on your side.
Okay. And then this person is currently working right now, right, Helen?
Yes, he was at Answer.
Okay, got it. Sprint 2. Okay. So let me get my mouse. My wrist is acting up. 1 second. Okay. Sprint 2. Background setup.
One way that some make sure that their work falls still. So this person redacted the name of the And for everybody on our Slack community, I will go ahead and share a copy of one of my TikTok case studies to give you an idea of how I was able to talk about a TikTok research project, but still keep it under NDA as well. So that will hopefully help people see different ways you can protect the nature of the information that came out of the study while still giving some good detail. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Helen, what this reminded me of when I was looking at it is remind me of one of my consultant that I placed at Meta. But this one was more like a presentation that she did versus like a portfolio. Like the exact same, very clean, very detailed, how many participants, how long, what's the length, where's the location. So this reminds me very much of that versus, like a portfolio, which I think it can go 2 ways. So right off the bat, I love that it is broken up into like, we have the background, we have the summary, detailed findings, recommendation, right? Like these are what I'm talking about when I'm looking at portfolios. Like you got the beginning and then you got to make a recommendation. Like what did that look like? So I love the setup. I love the background. Client A is in the process of designing a smartphone application, right? So that's what I'm saying about it doesn't have to be, you don't have to name it, but I'm like, okay, like this person is working with mobile. So they probably have used, they're working with Google or iPhones or Androids, right? Like that just gives me cues of this person have worked on like mobile application before. What were the objectives with the sprint? User feedback was collected on how user feels about the customer service program, registration flow, how easy and understandable it is. Okay, great. Go ahead, session flow. Again, like I think this one is for my own sake of as a recruiter, I'm not the hiring manager, so they might have a better idea, but for a recruiter, I always want to know what is your research question. Maybe that is objective, right? But I just want a big letter of like, hey, this is like the research question. And the reason I say this is because on for my consultant, I mentioned that like this reminds me of her portfolio was every time she talks about her portfolio, she refers back to like, again, like reminding you that this was the research question. Like this is why, and this is the research question. Background is great, session flow, very clean. I just love the way it's broken down, executive summary, key positive findings, improvements needed, detailed recommendation. Okay, oh, okay. I mean, I would say like, I remember taking a look at this. I would say it's very much detailed. Like I don't have too much, I don't have like too much recommendations for this person because the way it's also outlined, like if you go to findings and recommendation flow 1C medication confirmation, they have everything from like the quotes, if the partner understood, they know a yes button, right? Like how they work. They have recommendation on the bottom of what that looks like. It's very clear, even though this person's screen is covered, it's still an indicator of like, oh, this is what they're working on. It's like mobile application. So I actually didn't have a lot to say about this portfolio. And I'm not sure if this is just my screen, but this is like me nitpicking is the words are a little bit blurry on my screen, but again, that might be on my screen. I love that there's recommendation on every single page and there's some background and context to it. Recommendation and then appendix. Awesome. I would say, honestly, only at the end, and maybe I've missed this, is, hey, this is something that I learned from this, or this is something that our team have gathered, and this could also lead to new opportunity, or it's like, it's a done research, right? Because I know with Answer Lab, they don't, or with a lot of like consultant companies, they don't get to sometimes go through the full product life cycle. But again, it's okay to, have that recommendation is like having that recommendation, but then also reflecting on your research. Like after partnering, let's just say Apple, because I'm thinking of iPhones. After partnering with the Apple developer teams, we have found these recommendations. Here are some of the things that, could also lead to, in my reflection on this product is X, Y, and Z. So just like that reflection afterwards is always great, but then again, it's not applicable to everybody because they don't get to really see like the full life cycle. So this is also a really great presentation because this is something that my consultant did. And it has recommendation, the research question that she refers back to data, enough data not to overwhelm the person reading it. So that would be my 2 cents on this one. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ploy.
Yeah.
Does anyone have questions? I was navigating. Let's see.
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. I think it's time for us to wrap this up. And just a reminder to everybody, we have links in the chat for the feedback survey, which leads into the May 6th session. And then if you are not already on the networking spreadsheet, feel free to join, get started networking as talked about. And then our Slack community is also available for anybody who wants to jump in. I've been posting resources there, and I will share my case studies from TikTok for you guys to see there. All right. Thank you, everybody. It was our pleasure to have you.